So I'm sure many of you experienced Endwalkers starting out like this. And those of you who managed to get in and wanted to do some extreme raids are experiencing this. I wasn't surprised by this personally, given that the Shadowbringers design of the healers hasn't changed significantly. Given my own experience with game design, I understand why they didn't do drastic changes before the expansion launch. It takes a massive amount of money and resources to expand a game of this scope, be it new characters, zones, abilities, jobs, etc. So simply ensuring that a role is functional and can clear all content makes sense. So why are we even talking about this? Well, just because something works doesn't mean it can't be improved upon. Now, why should you listen to me discuss this? Well, I'm a fellow 14 player who wants to enjoy healing, but I'm disappointed with its current state. And this isn't my first time playing healing and support in a video game. My career as a healing and support player started in 2012 with these ladies in League of Legends. A tragic beginning, I know, but they did get me to gold in a couple seasons, and apparently playing them was irrefutable proof that I could only be a girl because no man would ever play these champions. After developing the strength of character to leave that game, I settled nicely into Final Fantasy XIV. I started picking up the healers and casters, and I've cleared quite a few extremes and even some savage floors. I also have a bachelor's degree in game design. For the love of God, don't get one. So I have a good understanding of what happens behind the curtain in game development. I also want to make it super clear that this isn't a thing bad so Yoshi P and dev team bad video. Given the severe congestion issues, I would rather the dev team devote their resources to fixing that crisis first. This video is simply intended to be good faith criticism from someone who loves the game and only wants to see it improved. Which means I'm going to start by mentioning some of the good things about healers currently. While their DPS options are very homogenized, each healer has a distinct healing style that helps them feel unique. The universal cast time of 1.5 seconds is a very welcome quality of life change. Allowing Astrologian to keep their seals even upon death does a lot to make the job more forgiving. It really needs to be appreciated that the dev team can keep all of the healers so balanced that none of them feel like a detriment in content. Mechanics like the Lily system and Addersting are actually a great step in the right direction to make GCD healing more engaging. In spite of the memes, Expedient is frankly amazing. Honestly, I wish more jobs had in-combat move speed buffs because it makes battles feel a lot more dynamic. Now before I get into my criticisms of healing, if you enjoyed the way healers play at the moment, that's totally fine. This video is focused on improving the healers for those that don't enjoy how they play, however. The first problem with healers is that they are either stressful or boring for many players. This is for a multitude of reasons, such as, at its core, healing in 14 is designed around being an obligation without trying to make it innately entertaining. It falls into the old design paradigm where healers are constantly needed but they have no innate reward for performing the role, so no one really wants to play it. In my experience, many veteran healers are frustrated with being expected to babysit the party and receiving no reward for it. What makes this worse is that any other player's mistakes immediately become the healer's responsibility, which makes the role feel both unengaging and punishing. From a game design perspective, this means the healers fail to be fun to master for many. The gameplay fantasy the dev team has in mind for the healers is fundamentally at odds with the combat they've created for this game. DPS is ultimately the only metric that matters for clearing content since you can't heal through a hardened rage. This means that the current measure of a skilled healer is one that can contribute as much damage as possible and only heal enough to guarantee the party survives. This leads to another point that even though there is unavoidable damage in 14, the vast majority of damage is designed to be avoided. While this is great for making content not too stressful for new healers, it can also lead to massive dead zones between when healing is actually needed. And when there's no healing needed, all you can do is spam your single DPS button, which becomes monotonous very quickly and makes solo content a chore. This means that skillful healing only rewards most players with boredom, which is the worst sin entertainment can make. Additionally, because GCD healing is a hard DPS loss, you're actively encouraged to avoid using them when possible. In essence, the healers are punished for doing what is expected of their role because DPS is the metric that matters the most. This next one is going to be a sore spot for many of you pre-Shadowbringers veterans. Many of the unique and interesting tools healers once had have been removed in favor of easily accessible healing options. A lot of people cite this as one of the reasons healers feel so homogenized these days. It's also led to excessive button bloat, with some abilities feeling frankly redundant. The biggest offenders I can think of are Celestial Opposition just being an aspected Helios and Fey Blessing existing when Indomitability could have just had a second charge. A less is more approach would help a lot of jobs in this regard. In Shadowbringers, it was possible to take a team of summoners and on 2 tanks and clear E4S on content without overgearing. Currently, with how much healing tanks and DPS received in Endwalker, it's very feasible for just a tank and a DPS to take down a boss from 50% health with a dead healer. Japanese players simply replace the healers with summoners and dancers, and they've been able to clear the current extremes. This begs the question of what purpose healers even serve in Endwalker's design space when it's very possible to clear current content in their absence. DPS is the most important metric for clearing content in this game's combat, so if you can get away with healing just enough with a team of DPS, why would you bother bringing healers? I understand the dev team's desire to put less pressure on healer players, but this current design only serves to make healers feel irrelevant as a role. As you can see, those are some rather significant problems with how healers are designed in 14. It makes them counterintuitive to learn and unrewarding for those who stick with it. If you think I'm crazy for saying all of this, try explaining to someone who doesn't play 14 yourself. They'll probably give you the same confused look I've gotten trying to explain it. So how do we fix this? Well, my thought is to propose a mini rework that works within the constraints of how combat already functions. We'll be approaching this with the constraint of not adding any completely new abilities that would require development time to create new assets for. However, we can dumpster dive through all the removed actions from previous expansions. We will also be following these guidelines. Number 1, provide an appropriate central fantasy. The fantasy we'll be using is drawing power from preserving life. Number 2, design mechanics that support this fantasy and make healing more engaging. For this, we're going to be looking at how we can improve each healer's GCD heals. They're the first healing actions we get, so they should feel more important functionally. This means we need to create mechanics that reward players for using them instead of punishing them. Number 3, prune and rework actions as necessary to help each healer feel mechanically distinct and enhance their fantasy. Expect each healer to have more abilities that are charge actions as a result of this. And number 4, each edition should focus on increasing depth instead of complexity. To get the ball rolling, the fantasy we're working with is that healers are empowered through preserving life. This means we need to focus on making healing reward the healer for doing their job. To bring this fantasy to life, we'll be focusing on reworking White Mage for this video. Let's first talk about the problems White Mage has. Over the years, many of the tools that made White Mage unique have been stripped away to become baseline features for the other healers. Some of these actions were later removed from PvE content entirely. This has left White Mage feeling bland and generic in terms of mechanics, and many players find it boring. For multiple expansions, White Mage has also been stuck in Astrologian Shadow due to functionally being outclassed. The Lily system has also become a mechanic we actively want to avoid using in Endwalker. The reduced cast time on Glare drastically improved White Mage's mobility and weaving space, which were the original purpose of the Lilies. Instead of being a mechanic White Mages should look forward to, they only served as softened a punishment. White Mage's MP economy also took a harsh blow due to the thin air nerfs, and that only makes the job more punishing now. This leaves us with a very basic job that lacks any unique features to help it stand out. Its identity is based around providing large amounts of healing in a game where that's rarely useful. This means we need to do some work to carve out a solid niche for White Mage amongst the other healers. We also need to give White Mage unique tools to let it finally step out of Astrologian Shadow. In this case, I think the fantasy of making White Mage a healer of raw power would be appropriate. This means the rewards for White Mage's healing need to let them feel like a powerful mage similar to their twin, Black Mage. Right now, we're going to get the basic quality of life changes out of the way first. These are mostly potency tweaks to accommodate the higher DPS potential and to make GCD healing feel less clunky. Also note that if I don't discuss an action, you can assume that it's unchanged. The first significant change will be replacing Free Cure with a trait at level 26 called Cure Mastery, which upgrades Cure to Cure 2. This removes a spell that becomes useless at later levels, removes an entirely useless trait, reduces button bloat, and makes level syncing down smoother. Since we'll be learning Cure 2 at level 26 now, Presence of Mind will take its place as the level 30 Conjurer quest reward. Now when you unlock White Mage, you gain immediate access to the Lily gauge along with Afflatus Solus and Afflatus Rapture. Instead of being their own separate buttons, both Lily spells will overwrite Cure 2 and Medica respectively, so long as you have one Lily on the gauge. All of this is being done to help solidify the job's foundation so it can be expanded upon at later levels. Now that we've talked about healing, let's get into DPS. We're going to be bringing back Fluid Aura and changing it to a spell with a 2.5 second cast time renamed to Water. Instead of binding an enemy, it now does damage and grants Cleric Stance for 30 seconds. Cleric Stance acts as a mini Enochian, boosting the White Mage's damage by 5% for the duration. Water's potency increases at the listed levels and eventually upgrades into Banish and then later Banish 3. Aside from granting Cleric Stance, this spell's function is also to serve as White Mage's secondary DPS option as a reward for healing, but I'll discuss how that will work a little later. This gives White Mage a simple 3-2-1 rotation that's easy to maintain with two 30-second timers. At level 40, we'll add our first healing reward with a shiny new trait, Divine Seal. This gives every tick of regen or Medica in combat a chance to proc similar to Black Mage's Thundercloud. You'll have 30 seconds to use this proc to triple the initial potency of your next arrow or Dia spell cast. This helps encourage using regens more for upkeep by rewarding extra damage and mobility. At level 50, White Mage gains the trait Conviction. Whenever you cast a healing spell besides regen Regen or Mega 2 on anyone below 50% HP, you'll gain 3 stacks of Conviction. Each stack is consumed to increase the potency of water by 200. Additionally, there's no time limit that you have to use these stacks by. I chose 50% HP because at a glance it's easier for players to identify. It also helps healers feel rewarded instead of punished for having to resurrect then heal their allies. A new ability White Mage will gain at level 50 is Sacrosanctity. It marks an enemy and causes the next 3 healing spells you cast within 15 seconds to trigger an effect. The effect is causing 200 potency of damage with each healing spell cast to the marked enemy. The idea behind this ability is to allow the White Mage to keep contributing damage while handling intense healing moments. Additionally, it also allows the White Mage to make a Afflatus Misery into a DPS gain. It also serves as a nod to Final Fantasy games where the White Mage could deal damage to undead with their cure spells. Sacrosanctity also has an additional effect where the first healing spell cast will either grant Divine Seal or Conviction respectively. This was added to make White Mage's proc mechanics a little more consistent. Asset-wise, this could simply be the old Cleric stance visual effects and animation. All of these mechanics were added to help expand upon the White Mage's foundation and to make your 1000th Circus Tower run a little more enjoyable. Now going forward, many of the changes are going to be more quality of life focused. A size will be tweaked to have a shorter recast, restore more MP, and have a second charge. Tetragrammaton has taken Thin Air's place as the level 58 ability. Don't worry, Thin Air isn't gone, it's just learned at level 62 now. Like a size, Tetra is also a charge action that adds a Lily to the healing gauge now when used in combat. This helps make the 60-second cooldown feel a little more reasonable. Largesse makes a return as the new level 60 capstone. Its boost to healing actions now affects the entire party while providing a combat peloton for 20 seconds. If that ends up being too powerful, then the cooldown can be nerfed to 90 seconds. This sounds like it'll step on Scholar's toes a bit with Expedient, but I also think it's a great way to help justify taking a White Mage over an Astrologian. This buff also helps give White Mage a little more utility without automatically defaulting to a party-wide DPS buff. Thin Air is still a charge action, but now it affects the next 3 spells for improved versatility. This lets the White Mage use it again for back-to-back heavy healing or to conserve a little MP while doing DPS. It also makes recovery from death a little more forgiving while you regain MP. Now Divine Benison is going to receive some significant changes. It now reduces damage taken by the target for 8 seconds by 15% exactly like Aquaveil. It still grants a shield, but the potency has been reduced to 400 and becomes 500 again upon upgrading to Aquaveil. The cooldown has been adjusted to accommodate the new power, but it still gains a charge at later levels. This is to help reduce button bloat and give White Mage a singular defensive ability that feels powerful. Additionally, this cooldown has an ability similar to the Blackest Night. When the shield is completely absorbed, the White Mage gains the effect of Bravery. Bravery causes the next Cure 2, Afflatus Solus, or regen cast on an ally to grant a 6% damage buff for 15 seconds. Some will argue that this makes White Mage too similar to Astrologian with how they have damage buffs, but at the same time they couldn't be more different in how they access them. It's also just not a very strong argument. It's like saying all DPS with a raid buff are just like Bard. Plenary Indulgence when executed now provides a barrier to all nearby allies. Considering both Sage and Scholar have multiple regen abilities, I think it's only fair that White Mage has at least 2 shielding abilities. Thematically, it also gives them an equivalent to Shell to Aquaveil's Protect. Since Afflatus Rapture is now learned at level 30, Afflatus Misery has been bumped back to be learned at level 76 to even out the leveling curve. Now for Lilybell, no, I won't call it its clunky full name. It mostly needs quality of life and usability adjustments. For starters, 3 minutes is far too long of a cooldown and it severely limits the applications of this ability. The duration should be doubled and the effect should also trigger whenever anyone takes damage, so it's much more usable in dungeons. Okay, that was a lot to cover. Another topic we're going to be discussing with this rework is button bloat. Frankly, it's a problem that plagues every job, but right now we're just sticking with the healers. In the case of White Mage, we added 3 new actions, but we also condensed 6 actions into 3 buttons as well. As a controller player myself, this is what my hotbar would look like with this setup. My rework isn't perfect in this regard, but it at least frees up options so you can keep sprint, limit break, a potion, and a free space. I didn't want to aggressively prune buttons because it would risk making White Mage feel ill-equipped for the upcoming content. And that's everything I would propose for a mini rework of White Mage. Some of you may criticize this design for encouraging overheal, and that is a fair criticism to make. My goal with this rework was to make the job feel more engaging overall rather than focus on nitty-gritty numbers. Everything I discussed was about improving the job's game design rather than focusing on its raid viability, which means the core question I want people to ask when looking at this rework is, would this be fun to play? If you're a little more curious on game design, I'm going to put some links to the articles I referenced for this video. If anyone is really taken by this design and wants to translate Japanese captions so the dev team can see it, you can find my business email on my About page. Thank you for sticking around until the end of the video, and I hope it gave you some food for thought.